The 2024 World Juniors featured some incredible moments, and the U.S. eventually winning the gold medal in the end. There were a ton of draft eligibles for this 2024 NHL draft that made their mark. But now, after the World Juniors, we're going to be going through the top 16 in the 2024 NHL draft, simulating it, going through my mock picks, and seeing what this draft could ultimately look like. But what are my predictions and how does this draft shape up? Well, make sure you watch till the end to see what every team ends up getting, and hit that subscribe button if you're new for more hockey content and prospect content just like this as we lead up to the NHL draft this summer. Now, before we get into the mock picks, I first had to do a draft simulation like we always do for the top of the draft here. Anaheim ended up getting the first overall pick, jumping 2 spots, and Seattle jumping up 9 spots to get the second overall pick. A lot of teams ended up dropping, but Anaheim finally getting some lottery luck here and getting that first overall pick. Seattle especially rising up in the lottery is wacky considering how good they've been lately, and right now with a 16-14-9 record getting the second overall pick, not too bad there. Especially for the Anaheim Ducks, who've had a lot of high forward picks, they'll add another one here with the first overall pick in the 2024 NHL draft. For our mock draft simulation, they will select Macklin Celebrini first overall. And with Celebrini, like we were talking about before, we saw a lot of World Junior draft eligibles this year. Celebrini was the highlight among them, though. At 17 years old and not turning 18 until this June as a 6-foot centerman, Celebrini is going to be an absolute rock star, and especially in Anaheim, is going to be amazing. Unfortunately, they lost out on Bedard, still got Carlson, but Celebrini is going to make that forward group absolutely tantalizing in the future. On top of Carlson, players like McTavish, Trevor Zegras, Troy Terry, they're going to have so many options, and Celebrini brings some great punch to that. He's not quite on the Bedard level, but you can see this here, how he's been able to perform at Boston University, how good he was on Canada's team that just had no help around him. He is going to be a superstar talent, and alongside Leo Carlson are going to be mainstays and franchise faces for this team. Next up, now we move on to the second overall pick, another Pacific Division team here now in the Seattle Kraken, who've risen all the way up to number 2, and this is one of the most interesting picks here because they could kind of go for anything. They could trade down, they can go for a defenseman here, but I think with their current team needs, they're going to end up selecting Cole Eiserman. Now, it's interesting Eiserman's stock right now, considering his season hasn't exactly been the most complete, but we know the goal scoring and we know the pedigree there, and he's another younger player, not turning 18 until June, but he has just been dominant in the NTDP, almost too dominant, because sometimes there will be shifts here and there where he'll take it off just because he knows how good he is, and especially on the power play, we know how good his shot will be. And I think for Seattle, this will be something that they really mull over. There's a lot of options here with the second overall pick, but I think considering the lack of top-end scoring on the roster, even with some of the players they've drafted already, I think you could have Eiserman maybe on the wing with Beniers. That could be an unreal fit. Next up at the third overall pick, we got the San Jose Sharks, and just like Will Smith was last year for them, this is a fundamental pick for this Sharks rebuild, and this is not a pick that they can afford to miss out on, and I think they'll end up selecting Sam Dickinson out of the London Knights. Now, there's a lot of reasons for this. I think their defensive depth in the prospect pool is definitely lacking, but that top-end talent, I think, also needs a little bit of rejuvenation. Sam Dickinson, to me, is still the best defenseman in this draft by a hair. Zeev Boom is definitely taking a run for his money, in my opinion, but I think especially for the Sharks and what they've valued over the past few years, and that size, and making sure they have a good skating pedigree too, Sam Dickinson is able to fill those boxes. He's good, he's physical, he's quick, and offensively, he's been able to put up some great statistics for London this year in the OHL. In 38 games, has 13 goals, 36 points, has an amazing shot on him as well. I think a third overall, we'll see if it ends up being a reach, but I also think for San Jose, they need a defenseman in this draft to really start building a great future. Sam Dickinson will be a great start. Next up at fourth overall is the Chicago Blackhawks, and even though they don't get as much lottery luck as they did last year with this simulation, still at fourth overall, there are a ton of options, especially on forward, and I think they'll end up going for Caden Lindstrom. Now again, even though they didn't win the lottery, to me this is one of the biggest potentials in the 2024 draft, and is a player that is working his way into a lot of people's top 5, including mine as well. But another player that's a younger birthday, with a February birthday, but 6'4", 216 pounds. The hands on Lindstrom are incredible, and you can see what he's been able to do with Medicine Hat. In 32 games, he has 27 goals, 46 points, a driver of the bus there. And to me, especially alongside Bedard and Nazar and some of the other young forwards they have coming up, Lindstrom brings some size that they don't have in the prospect pool. And I think, like Quinton Byfield a few years ago, has that potential to fill out that frame offensively too, and really bring a lot of just a 200 hard-foot game as well. But really, the name of the game is his skill, is that game-breaking skill that he has with the puck. I mean, he is able to do things that you don't see out of many players like him, especially at his size. I think Chicago will really be salivating to get him, and we'll draft him 4th overall. Next up, coming in here at number 5, and this is the Ottawa Senators pick. This one is interesting considering how much turnover we've seen in the front office. I'm not really sure where the priorities end up landing, but I think this is a player like kind of like Cutter Gauthier a couple of drafts ago that we see really rise in draft boards and really rise on draft day, and that is Michael Brandsegg-Nygard, a player that was a part of the World Juniors for Team Norway this last year, and I think looked the part. And I think it's really interesting to see his projection, his just stock around the league. As you can see, as a 6'1" winger, I think Ottawa is really going to be liking the style that he plays with. You can see how he's playing the Allsvenskan. Not a lot of point production, but I think the point production should be a lot higher from what we've seen. He's just gotten pretty unlucky from what I've been able to tell. And also at the World Juniors this year, you can see with Norway, 5 points in 5 games. If you remember a couple of years ago with Marco Rossi in his first World Juniors, how it was a disaster with him in Austria, didn't even get a single point. Well, with Brandsegg-Nygard, he's able to already make an impact, especially in the power play. He was brilliant defensively, had some great moments, especially versus the US, and I think looked pretty good. Now, I would like to see some more 5-on-5 production, at least in the World Juniors, but this is a player that is strong defensively, has a mature physical game, and I think has a growing offensive limit as well. We'll see how good he's able to become, but I think like a Cutter Gauthier, he's going to be a surprise, and I think goes a lot higher than people expect. Next up at number 6, and we got the Columbus Blue Jackets here. There's a couple of interesting picks. I maybe even would have considered Michael Brandsegg-Nygard for this position if he was still available, but considering how many Russians they brought onto the roster, I don't think they're going to be afraid to select Ivan Demidov with the 6th overall pick. Considering his contract situation isn't as bad as Michkov's in his draft year, I think Demidov will still be a player hovering around that 5 to 8 range. In terms of pure talent and skill, he's right up there with Celebrini, but this is a player that has had some inconsistencies this year in the MHL, has had some times just too much individuality, but the skill set is there, the game-breaking talent is there, and the pace at which he plays the game. I mean, just able to read every single player on the ice and just be such a consistent player offensively. We'll see how much of that's able to translate onto the next level, and I think there will be some growing pains as he transitions onto the KHL, but I think Demidov is still, in terms of talent, one of the best and premier players of this draft class. I mean, Columbus will see it the same way. Now on to 7th overall, and this is a team that I'm just kind of flabbergasted to pick for, and that's the Buffalo Sabres, considering how many prospects they have, and almost too many prospects. I mean, this is a team that needs to be better for the now, but just has so many wealth of options. I could see this being a team that just trades their first-round pick in the end if they end up getting a good deal by the draft, but if they were to select anybody, I think they will end up selecting Russian D Anton Silayev, who has had a real up and down of just season in his draft stock, has been up with the crazy start in the KHL of his point production, and a little bit down as we've seen it kind of come back down to earth. But you can see 6'7", 207 pounds, still as a 17-year-old. He's been able to put up 11 points in 46 KHL games, a much better pace in the first couple of months of the season. But with Silayev, I think he's gotten a lot more used to that KHL pressure. And defensively, I think we have seen him turn a little bit of a page. I don't think he's going to be the most flashy player. I think he's going to get more of his point production on the power play, for instance. But I do like the potential of his skating and just how mature he is in his overall game. I don't think he's going to be a player that blows you away, but I think for Buffalo, they kind of need more stability on that defense. I think Silayev is a guy they will end up targeting. Next up at 8th overall, and we got the Calgary Flames in this position, a team that could kind of go all over the place with their picks. I could see them going for a player like Berkly, Catton at this spot, but I think ultimately they'll end up selecting a D in Artyom Levshunov. Now, we talked about Silayev and some of the maturity, some of the consistency in his defensive play. Well, Levshunov has completely forgotten that this year with Michigan State University. From what I've seen, this is a player that's just an absolute cowboy offensively, will just be in the offensive zone as a defenseman, just in front of the net, just in front of the slot because he just likes to be. But you can see that's some pretty decent offensive results so far, 19 points in 20 games. But I do think he's a player that might need to be coached a little bit more to adapt to the NHL style. But I do think the potential there with how quick he is on his stick and how good he can be defensively. I saw a lot more out of him in the USHL last year, so we'll see if he's more of a project player. But even for Calgary as well, I think especially on that defense, they could use a little bit more offense. I think Levshunov can bring some really big potential, and he loves to be just this humongous player that makes big plays. And I think we've also seen with how Calgary has drafted recently that size for them is still very important. Now going on to 9th overall, and we got the Montreal Canadiens at this spot, and this might be kind of the best case scenario besides winning the draft lottery if they were to end up in this position. I think they'll end up selecting Berkly Catton. Now, I think some of you might be kind of restraining from this, considering his size at 5'11". He is a smaller forward for sure, and I think for Montreal, yes, they have a couple of players like that, like Cole Caulfield already, but I think players like Nick Suzuki and Jaroslav Kloski and potentially a couple of trade additions might end up alleviating some of those issues. With a player like Berkly Catton at this spot, I don't think he's a player that skill-wise you can afford to lose. You can see what he's been able to do with the Chiefs in the WHL this year. 35 games, 24 goals, 34 assists, 58 points. But it's what he's been able to do with those points. It's the quickness, it's the smarts, it's the adaptability with his puck. He is a play driver through and through. He is so electric, and especially offensively, is a great transition player as well. This is just such an all-around offensive talent. And I think especially at 9, he'll end up dropping a little bit because of that size. But I don't think you can afford to leave a player like that off. I think Calgary just barely misses out on him, and Montreal is able to snag him here. Next up at number 10 here, rounding out the top 10 picks, we're going to go into the Minnesota Wild here, a team that has selected a lot of first-rounders recently. You got Marco Rossi, you of course now got Brock Faber as a second-rounder who they traded for. Coming out of the roster now, you got Charlie Stramel, Badgers legend, looking a lot better over the last month, and of course being a first-round pick last year for them. But this is a big one. They have not had a pick as high as this in a very long time, really since the Marco Rossi range. But at number 10, I think they're going to end up selecting a D here, and I think they're going to go for Zia Buum, who we saw play a major role for the U.S. in their gold medal win this last year, had a huge goal in the gold medal game, but at 6 foot, 183 pounds, this is one of the best offensive D in the class, and one of the smartest too. You can see with the University of Denver, 25 points in 18 games, 5 points, 3 goals in 7 World Junior games. This is a player that he has such a great baseline level of skating, of smarts. He doesn't take risks that he doesn't need to. And I think for an offensive defenseman, he's going to be a really coachable guy, a player that the players love to play with, and is just such a good, adaptable defenseman. He's smart, he's quick, he makes decisions at a great rate, and I think Buum is going to be a fantastic D to place along Faber in the future. Next up at the 11th overall pick, this one is interesting. Formerly the Tampa Bay Lightning's pick, but because of them out of the playoff race right now, the Chicago Blackhawks have their pick and have their second pick inside the top 12. With the 11th overall pick already selecting Kaden Lindstrom, I think they will end up selecting Konsta Helenius. Another player that we saw at the World Juniors this year, this time with Team Finland. He made a pretty decent mark. Even though the point production wasn't amazing, I thought he looked pretty solid, and especially defensively with the smarts that we know he has. We saw some pretty big moments out of him, especially versus better competition in that second half as well. But you can see at 17 years old, he's a shorter player at 5'11", 181 pounds, but he is mature. He is so good on the forecheck and just a relentless player all over the ice. My main concern is over the skill level and how much that potential brings him. But I think for Chicago, already selecting Lindstrom, Bedard, Nazer, Reichel over the past few drafts, they're going to want a player who's a lot more of a stable, solid force in that middle six. You can see what he's been able to do in the Liga, what he was able to do in the World Juniors, playing a prominent role for Team Finland. I think there's going to be a great middle six guy for Chicago that will provide some glue and some pretty big goals in the end. Next up to number 12, and a few picks shy of the 16th overall pick, which will end us off today. Let's go on to the Arizona Coyotes and their 12th overall pick here. We know how much they prioritize size, especially on forward, well, besides really Logan Cooley as the main exception. But with this 12th overall pick, I think they'll end up selecting out of Windsor, Liam Greentree, who is a player I expect to rise quite a bit just over the second half of this season, and especially on draft day, like a Michael Brandsegg-Nygard, because of his pro all-around talent. I think in this draft class that has a lot of unpredictability, teams are going to be flocking out of players like Greentree, 6'2", 198 pounds, and you can see what he's been able to do with Windsor this year on a just horrible team. He, in 34 games, has 23 goals, 52 points, has been a driver of the bus offensively. His opportunistic style, I think teams are going to absolutely love, but the solid all-around skill. He's a player that's not the quickest with his skating, but is good enough and is positionally very sound, and you, of course, have the size there and the physicality he brings and the way he's able to have just a booming shot with that physicality. I think especially Arizona is going to love him and put him along a playmaker and a play driver like Logan Cooley, and I think it will be a match made in heaven. Next up on the 13th overall pick and the St. Louis Blues, we've seen them go pretty forward heavy, surprisingly, over the past few drafts. And I think defensively, there are a couple of guys that could be NHLers in the future for them, but I think they could look to add a major D onto the prospect pool. And I think they'll end up adding Adam Jiricek, who I think just makes a lot of sense for the Blues style of game. Has really just not had a good season in Czechia, unfortunately. Is a younger player, though, at 17 years old still, at 6'2", 168 pounds. You can see he didn't really play a whole lot. He played a decent stretch in Czechia, but got injured, of course, course, in the World Juniors, and now is out for the rest of the season, unfortunately, which is a major blow, especially considering his games in Czechia this year weren't the greatest. He kind of got overplayed, and I think especially as a younger D was kind of overwhelmed. You can see just how the plus-minus difference definitely tells the story there. But I think with Jiricek, there's a really big baseline of physical play. He's a guy that defensively has a lot of great instincts, but just hasn't really been able to turn around. I think this is definitely one of the bigger projects inside this top 15. But I think for St. Louis that they're patient, it could end up working out and could be a player on their middle pair. Next up at 14th overall in the Detroit Red Wings. Now we'll see if they're actually in this position by the time the season is done. Maybe they'll be a playoff team as well. We'll see what ends up happening. But as of right now, with that 14th overall pick, I think they'll end up selecting Tej Iginla. Of course, Jerome Iginla's son. He is an absolute rock star though, and he's just so much fun to watch. And he's also an extremely young player, an August birth date, so he doesn't turn 18 for a few more months well after the draft this year. But he's 6 foot, 185 pounds, and this year with Kelowna has been amazing. 49 points in 37 games, 27 goals there too. But he is just so much fun. He's electrifying. His physical play is awesome. He's just a guy that loves to battle, loves to get in the tight spaces and make something work offensively. He's something that I think Detroit is gonna really love, and I could even see him going higher on draft day. I could see him being inside the top 10. His stock is really rising. I think when it's all said and done, he'll be one of the better players in this draft. Now we got another traded pick here at 15th overall with the San Jose Sharks having their first round pick from the Erik Karlsson deal, and that pick is top 10 protected. So as of right now, it would end up being the Sharks selection for their second pick in the first round. We saw them go for Sam Dickinson already, but I think they'll still continue to add on the defense. And for me, I see them going for Zayne Parekh. Now, with Sam Dickinson being a much more responsible defenseman, I think they'll go for another OHLD who is just a lot more of a just electrifying player. You can see just what he's been able to do with Saginaw over just the past couple of years. The goal scoring last year, 21 goals in 50 games as a D. This year, in 36 games, he has 50 points. He is going to be a dynamic offensive D and a driver on a power play someday and really be that guy. And I think especially with San Jose, they got Sam Dickinson, who will be a more mature physical force, while a player like Parekh can just go out there and ball however he likes. He can just do so many things on the ice. His passing, his vision is excellent. And I think in an offensive role, San Jose, especially with a player like Will Smith, that pair could be nasty. Now going on to our last pick in the mock draft at 16th overall with the Washington Capitals here. This is a pick that, just like Ryan Leonard, will be extremely important to rebuilding this team. But I think at 16th overall, they're going to go for a Russian here and go for Nikita Artamonov, who had an incredible start in the KHL, just like Silayev. But I think especially with Artamonov, it can lead to some major results in the future. He's a player that is really smart, really adaptable, and we've seen just how well he's been able to adapt to the pro level in the KHL this year. In 36 games, he has 17 points, and a lot of those points aren't really fluff. He's driving play, he's looking good, and he's not going to be the most electrifying player in the world, but already has a pro style level of play. Kind of reminds me a little bit of just how well Konsta Helenius has been able to do in the Liga this year, who we talked about earlier. I think for the Caps, like Ryan Leonard, he's going to provide a good stable force on that middle six someday, likely as a second line forward, and could do pretty well. And in the middle of the draft, you'll take that. But those are my top 16 picks for the 2024 NHL Draft as of right now after the World Juniors. A lot of movement since the last time we made this video a couple of months back, and a lot of players that have risen their draft stock. But I want to know in the comments down below what you guys thought. What did you agree? What did you disagree with? And who do you think your team will end up taking in the 2024 draft? Let us know what your thoughts down below. Of course, make sure you share it with all the hockey fans you guys know online, and click on this card for all your hockey content, all your hockey prospects, all my hockey prospects, not all yours, all of my hockey prospects content right one playlist. Make sure to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell, and I will see you in the next one. Have a great hockey day, and I will see you. Goodbye.